Okay, I think we are good to go. So good evening. My name is Jonathan Stewart. I'm a member of the Shenandoah Group of the Sierra Club Executive Committee. On behalf of the Shenandoah Group of the Sierra Club, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We have a pretty fantastic turnout, so thank you to everyone who shared this within your networks. Please do reach out to us on Facebook. We are at facebook.com/sc.shen.group. If you're interested in connecting with our local Sierra Club group or looking for ways to get more involved in general, also, please feel to reach out to us at email sc.shen.group@gmail.com. Heads up that we have another free virtual event coming up on October 20th. We're going to be doing some group brainstorming, if you are interested in that sort of thing, and discussing climate action through a lens of motivational psychology. We'll have a panel of guests, including Dr. Wayne Teal, Dr. Ken Barron, and Lizzie Emsch, who is a senior at James Madison University and the president of the Environmental Management Club. So you can expect to see that event coming up on our website and social media in the next week or so here. But tonight, we are talking about urban forestry. We have Dr. Mikaela Schmitt-Harsh joining us this evening. Mikaela is an associate professor in the Department of Interdisciplinary Liberal Studies at James Madison University. She holds a PhD in environmental science from Indiana University, a dual master's degree in public affairs and environmental science, and a BA in biology. Sorry, my cat is being a punk right now. 1 second. Classic Zoom. Her research started in the mountains of Guatemala, where she studied the ecosystem services and shade-grown coffee systems and the land use cover change dynamics of coffee forest landscapes. Her current research examines human-environment interactions in urban and suburban landscapes, with directed attention to understanding the ecosystem services and decision-making dynamics of residential and community forests. Mikaela is an ISA certified arborist and currently contributes to a number of campus and community initiatives that address urban forest composition and cover, including JMU's Tree Advisory Committee, the City of Harrisonburg's Land Use and Green Space Committee, and the Environmental Performance Standards Advisory Committee. Dr. Schmitt-Harsh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me just grab my screen share and make sure that you can see the slides. Does that look all right to you?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks to the Shenandoah Group of the Sierra Club for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm glad to be here and to share some of my work and experiences with you. We have a really good sized group here tonight, which is exciting for me to see, perhaps a lot of interest in urban trees and urban forests. I think the general format that I've been instructed about is to present some information to you, and then we'll follow it up with time for questions at the end. But, well, no, you can't add a comment, right, or to the chat function until the very end. Is that right?
Yeah, it looks like we have 60 participants. I think they're all folks that I recognize most of the names. So I think I can go ahead and turn the chat on if people want to throw comments in there as they think about it, and then you can refer to those later. But so I'll go ahead and get the chat going here.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. I see some familiar names. In fact, some folks that I work with on one of the city committees, EPSAC, Joy, Deidre, and Laura, I see. Nice to see you. So Jonathan was talking a little bit about my research enterprise at JMU. I've been teaching at JMU for 7 years now. I'm a transplant from Minnesota. And my background is really interdisciplinary and very application oriented. You might find me out measuring and inventorying trees, collecting soil samples in city parks or on the campus of JMU, behind a desk doing GIS and remote sensing to assess tree canopy cover, which I'll talk a little bit about today, or developing and disseminating household surveys to better understand the quote unquote human dimensions of urban forest programs. So overall, Jonathan summarized it very well. My research aims to understand the ways in which people, both individually and collectively, manage trees and the services or disservices they receive from trees. So tonight, I thought I'd share some of my work on what inspires me and some big takeaways on the state of urban forestry. It's not a research talk by any means. But I do bring in recent research to help kind of inform where the current state is and what we project into the future. But a lot of this talk is going to be about scales that are relevant to the municipality as well as the individual household, mostly because I didn't know who would be attending and what sort of interest level you all have. So by the promise of my title, Urban Forest, 10 Things That Everyone Should Know About Trees in the City, it makes sense to start out with a brief note about what urban forests are. And then we created a very, very short poll to get your perspectives on some of the benefits of urban trees. And then I'll move into a short discussion about why urban forests matter and some big takeaway lessons on the state of urban forestry and arboriculture. And then finally, if there's interest, I have a whole long list of resources. If you want to plant trees, if you want to get engaged in the community, ways to do that. Okay, so let's dive in here. The most obvious question that we begin with is, what exactly are urban forests? When you think of the term forest, the most likely image that appears is probably that of a pristine or natural forest. In fact, the background of Jonathan's screen right there. Shenandoah National Park or George Washington National Forest. And we think of forests as, you know, the trees and the undergrowth, the branches, the stems, the leaves. But forests are also found in heavily developed areas, in urban, suburban areas along the fringe. And they're not exclusive to just urban parks in these more developed areas. In fact, the term urban forest for scholars and practitioners generally refers to all naturally occurring and planted trees in and around urban areas. Now, these do include trees on public property, such as street trees, park trees, plaza trees, remnant forest stands, trees in riparian areas or vacant lots. But it also includes privately owned trees, trees in the front and backyard of residential lots. So some of these trees may appear as islands, and this is a misconception, that the trees in my backyard are not part of a forest system. But in fact, they are part of the larger forest system. And we include private residential lots in with park trees, street trees, and all these other categories that I've shown here. Now, key to defining urban forests is defining what urban means. And here's where it's easy to quickly get into the weeds because there's many different perspectives on the meaning of urban. Some view it based on land cover, a high percentage of built up surfaces, others by the function of a place, urban ways of living, urban economic activities, a high degree of ingenuity and culture, and others by population size and density, or both. So the Census Bureau defines urban based on population size and density. And so that's, when I show you some images, it's based on the definition and the classification of urban based on the US Census Bureau. So just how urban is the United States? Only a small fraction of the land cover in the US is classified as urban. In fact, just over 3%, or equivalent to about 68 million acres. But this very small percentage supports over 80% of the population. And urban land is expanding considerably. It's projected to increase substantially over the next half century. The Northeast up here and the Southeast over here are the most urbanized regions of the country. And these regions are also expected to see rapid increases in population size, density, and land area. Now, this image is rather old. It's from a paper published in 2010. And the map is from 2000, so 21 years old, but surprisingly very difficult to find good representations of urban-rural divide. This one shows it as a percentage of county area. And the actual statistics here shown on the left are newer. It's just the maps are old. So this image here looks, you know, we have the same map of the United States. published in 2010 from the same authors, David Nowak and Eric Greenfield, two US forest scientists who've been studying urban forests for years. This image right here is showing canopy cover, or the percentage tree cover, specifically in urban areas. And in 2014, tree canopy cover in urban areas was estimated to equal about 39% on average. Now, there's wide variability that exists. So you can see in these darker shades of green, cities in naturally forested regions like the Northeast, and in particular the New England states, average nearly twice the percentage tree cover of cities in grassland and more desert regions. Not to be unexpected by any means. Why we use this urban tree canopy is because it's a simple proxy for assessing the amount of the urban forest and its associated benefits. It's very cost effective, and it's a tool that can be readily taught and used by cities across the United States, across the world, in a relatively uniform format. It's much easier to look at Google Earth, for example, to assess tree canopy than it would be to go out and individually count every single tree on the streets and in the parks and record each tree's location. So what tree canopy is, because I'm going to show you something from the city of Harrisonburg next. What tree canopy is and how it's assessed probably is rather intuitive to you. This right here is a Google Earth image, and it gives you a pretty good sense of how we conceptualize and think about tree canopy. We look at tree foliage, tree leaves, branches, stems that cover the ground when viewed from above. It's not a count necessarily, though you can count individual trees this way if it's sparsely treed. But instead, it's looking at aerial coverage of the tree canopy. And one limitation of this, tree canopy is certainly dynamic, right? We're planting trees, perhaps trees are removed, but assessments of canopy are often static. They represent a glimpse or a snapshot of the tree canopy at one particular time. So just keep that in mind when I'm showing you some images. And one of the most basic metrics that we're looking at is percentage of land that is taken up by some land cover class. So in this percentage over here, we're looking at 35% tree cover, 10% green vegetation, but not treed, 30% buildings, and then down the list. This is a common set of metrics that you would see in many cities. And that brings me to Harrisonburg. A tree canopy assessment was recently completed for the city of Harrisonburg. And this was a project started in 2016 by the Virginia Department of Forestry, the Green Infrastructure Center out of Charlottesville, and then the city of Harrisonburg. And the aim was to evaluate the city's urban tree canopy and determine how to best incorporate urban forests into the city's stormwater management programs. So the project was completed in 2018. I wasn't a part of this project, but I was a part of the I attended the presentations, and I have all these documents at hand. And so what this project found was that citywide tree canopy equals 26.5%. When compared to other Virginia cities, Harrisonburg is shown to have just a fair, I would say, coverage of urban canopy, lower than Blacksburg, Richmond, Waynesboro, Fredericksburg, and then of course highest up the list here is Charlottesville at about 45% tree canopy. So there's room for improvement, certainly, within the city of Harrisonburg. And one other thing that came out, there's lots of things that came out of this project, but one thing that I thought was quite noteworthy was seeing that tree canopy varies by quadrant. And that's something that the researchers defined, these different quadrants. 4 were used: northwest, shown here outlined in purple up here, northeast, southwest, and southeast. And you can see that the northwest quadrant had a much lower canopy at 21% than all others. The southwest and northeast had the highest canopy at 30%. Now I show this because these sorts of assessments can be really useful in helping to define potential planting areas, keying out where we have a deficit in tree canopy and perhaps where we have an abundance of maybe vacant lots or lawn space that we could plant a tree on. So this map is really small, but it just gives you a sense of another outcome of this project. All the green areas are treed areas, and here in orange are potential planting areas. And if you're interested in this analysis, the city of Harrisonburg published all of this on their website, and they have a really great resource called Trees to Offset Stormwater, or Trees to the number 2 offset. Okay, so this is a good time to pause. That way I can get a sip of water and I get your perspectives on urban trees. I have a really short poll, in fact, only one question, so you can skip these last 2 right here. I haven't yet touched upon why trees matter, but I'd like to hear your perspective first. So the question is, trees provide a variety of benefits to individuals and neighborhoods. What are the most important tree benefits to you personally? And I have a list of 10. The other can't be included because Zoom doesn't allow more than 10. And I'd like you to identify your top 3, only 3. And so what I'm going to do is launch the poll to you. And I think through the chat function, you can let us know if there is a problem. But let me just see meeting controls poll. Okay, so I'm gonna launch it now. And it should pop up on your screen. And essentially when you answer it, it comes back to us in real time. We're getting there almost. 50 out of 60 have participated. %91% participation. That's pretty good, I would say. Thank you for participating in this. I think the responses have slowed, so I might go ahead and end the poll. I apologize if you want to participate but did not get to. Certainly would love your perspective at the end if that's the case. So I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. And Jonathan, if you could let me know if it pops up for you, although you're a co-host. Let's see. I'm going to trust, I hope that you can view those results. And what I'm seeing on my end is that a large majority of folks identify shade and cooling as one of the most important benefits of urban trees, habitat for wildlife, and improved air quality. Those are the top 3 that I see. And then followed after that is stormwater benefits, beauty and aesthetics, health benefits from access to or use of parks. No one, interestingly, identified increase in property values. So this is just, I think, good practice for me. I would love to hear your perspective about, and just follow it up really, if in the last couple of years you've planted trees and whether your relationship with trees and outdoor spaces has changed. A lot of research is demonstrating that more people are getting outside in the last 2 years than ever before. And access to green space provides a number of psychological and direct health benefits. And so that brings me into a very short kind of summary of why we should care about urban forests. This is a satellite image of Hillendale and then a residential area next to Hillendale. So this could be thinking about the benefits of a public space, a public park, as well as space in your front and backyard, the shading benefits of trees in those areas. So within the urban forest community, the way we like to segregate these various types of ecosystem services is to look at them through an environmental lens, a social lens, and an economic lens. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to pinpoint a couple key benefits here. And please note that these lists are not exhaustive by any means. Even the poll benefits are not exhaustive by any means. I've left things off of the poll. So in terms of some of the environmental benefits, we have the benefits conferred by trees as they relate to stormwater mitigation. This is particularly important for the city of Harrisonburg, hence I think why we have a pretty active stormwater management program. And in the humid, temperate areas of the eastern United States, where we typically get lots of rainfall, not this summer, or we should say excluding this summer, one of the biggest challenges that we have in urban areas is the quantity of runoff that we get. Stormwater runoff. And of course, also the quality of that water that's running off. By and large, though, it's a quantity problem, and trees are really good, their canopies in particular, at intercepting and capturing some of that rainfall. When rainfall hits impervious surfaces like these roads, water quickly runs off and either has to be handled in a stormwater management system, or it finds its way to a natural body of water, which has implications for either flash flooding or water quality, because as water moves across urban surfaces, it picks up various types of pollutants. Now, many of you also identified air quality as a benefit. Certainly the purification of air, one of the main properties of trees, right? Sequestering carbon, which is down here, and releasing oxygen back into the air, but it also can help purify or reduce particulate matter. Certain trees do a really good job at that. And then of course, trees help provide habitat for birds and other animals. Last item that I have identified here for environmental is heat islands, in that trees can help provide shade and a cooling impact in urban areas. And this is something I'm going to highlight in some of the key takeaways from this talk. So in the social bin, the past years has seen a rapid rise in both experimental and observational research that examines the relationship and impact of trees on human health. And in general, research demonstrate that there's, like I said, both psychological benefits. It can help restore attention, lower blood pressure, reduce stress. In fact, there are more and more cities, even JMU Arboretum, offering workshops on forest bathing, where it encourages participants to simply be out in nature and almost decompress. That's simplifying it, but it's kind of reducing the load. It also has direct health benefits. It increases access to a park, for example, increases physical activity levels. As well, trees providing a shading effect can help reduce heat-related illnesses. And then, let's see, aesthetics. 31% of participants identified aesthetics as a primary benefit of trees. Not included on that list was sense of place and to promote social cohesion or belonging, but there's some research indicating that trees and green space is inviting to residents of that city. And then finally here, the economic bin. Trees have economic benefits. And this is one that we oftentimes need to put some focus on, because ultimately decision makers are making decisions and setting policies on large scales that are driven by economic factors. So there's a lot of existing and emerging data out there about some of the benefits to public health, to energy savings in terms of building energy consumption and lowering air conditioning costs. And then something that's emerging is a very strong linkage between presence of trees and the appraised value of residential homes. More trees are often associated with higher home values. So we're making a very strong case that there's value in trees, urban trees in particular. Unfortunately, urban forests in the United States are under threat. Some would say at a crisis point. These are snapshots of some articles published in the last 3 years from PBS, Scientific American, Science Alerts. They stem largely from a report published in 2018 by the 2 Forest Service scientists I mentioned previously, David Nowak and Eric Greenfield. And this team is looking at canopy cover across the entire United States over time. So I have a snapshot of their methods here. Tree cover changes were examined using high resolution imagery over a 5-year period from 2009 to 2014. And they have a very rich data set, 1,000 random points in each state. So over 50,000 paired date image points representing before and after. So 100,000 analysis points. So the result of their work, very briefly, because I want to get into kind of the crux of the talk, the 10 big takeaways. The results are that 23 states had a statistically significant decrease in urban tree cover, shown here on this map with this kind of crosshatch over here. A total of 45 states showed a net decline, and these are all basically every color besides the white. Only 3 states had a net increase. It was not significant, but it was still an increase. Those were Mississippi, New Mexico, and Montana. Putting some facts and figures to this data, the authors estimate that tree cover declined at a rate of 175,000 acres annually, which corresponds to approximately 36 million trees lost per year. That's a lot of ecosystem services lost as well. Now in Virginia, tree cover declined at a rate of 0.1% annually. So we're here in this kind of dark gray area. We're at the upper limit of it, lower limit of it, 0.1%. And this amounts to a loss of just under 3,000 acres of urban tree cover, or about 621,000 trees per year. Now, is this a hiccup in the data? Is this an anomaly? In fact, the authors have done this almost exact same analysis previously for the 5-year period before, 2002 to 2009, and they found similar results. Urban forests are declining. And there are plenty of reasons for the downward trend, many that I'm not going to get into here, but we have insect infestations. In Harrisonburg, we have the spread of the emerald ash borer, and that's spreading all over, not just in Virginia. But we have insect infestations, storms that are more frequent and more powerful. We have population growth and sprawl, old age of trees, right? All of these things have claimed large numbers of trees, but it's worthwhile to note that tree planting programs, small and large alike, haven't kept up with the attrition. They're often trotted out with much fanfare, these 1 million tree planting campaigns, but follow through has been lacking in many locations. Sometimes a large number of saplings are planted, but they're not maintained, they're not watered, they're not mulched, they're not pruned perhaps. Or some big tree planting programs have simply been abandoned. So I'm building the case for my first big takeaway, which is urban forests, urban trees as well, right, aren't just niceties, they're necessities. It's rather simple, in fact, right? We know that trees provide a number of benefits. Their research is clear, but there's often a disconnect between what the science is telling us and the investments that are being made. City streets, for example, are often not fully stocked, which means that people aren't reaping the full benefits that they could be. Vacant lots could be treed, but perhaps they're not. Parking lots could have more trees, but they're not, right? The list kind of goes on. And of course, these are overgeneralizations. There's variation across states and within states as well, the cities within these different locations. But the crux of this is the long-term provision of ecosystem services is heavily reliant on strong, sustained effort of annual tree planting and a proactive, comprehensive management approach. And when you look at municipalities, many locations are or already are developing or already have a management plan. The city of Harrisonburg just this last year sent out a survey for feedback from the community because they are in the process of working with a consultant to write a management plan. So that's exciting news for the city. Okay, takeaway number 2 is that we need trees in cities, not just around cities. Evidence is clear that global annual temperatures are warming, they're rising. 2020 was the hottest year on record, tied with 2016, which is closely followed by 2019. More record or near record warm years are likely on the horizon. And in cities, temperatures are even warmer than in surrounding locations. This is because of something known as the urban heat island effect. And what's happening with the urban heat island, essentially in a very quick nutshell, is that roads and rooftops, concrete and asphalt absorb and hold heat from the sun. They slowly release it back out, often slowly such that you get warmer temperatures as the day goes on, even in the early evening. So we have warmer temperatures, sometimes on the order of 3 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the surrounding rural landscape. That's substantial. You know, you sit under the canopy of a tree in the middle of summer and you'll quickly get a respite from the heat. Tree planting remains one of the most cost-effective solutions to mitigating the urban heat island effect and also to controlling the rise in carbon dioxide emissions or concentrations in the atmosphere. So there's number 2. This leads me to number 3. We need trees and their benefits spread more equally in and around cities. The urban heat island effect, made worse by climate change, has serious effects on people's health. Heat-related illnesses have risen dramatically in the last decade, and higher temperatures also intensify air pollution, like smog, a pollutant that is deleterious to your health and can trigger asthma attacks and other respiratory illnesses. So planting and conserving trees is one way to reduce heat islands and improve people's quality of life. One challenge that has been raised in cities all over the United States is that trees are not equitably distributed across the city and across neighborhoods. In fact, a map of tree cover in almost any American city is also a map of income. This is a direct statement from American forests. Lower income neighborhoods usually don't have as many trees. And that inequitable distribution of trees in cities can exacerbate social inequities. Disadvantaged and underserved neighborhoods may experience higher incidences of heat-related illnesses, of asthma, and other acute respiratory problems. So this image right here, this side-by-side image, shows 2 different neighborhoods in Detroit. One, a wealthier neighborhood compared to one with a lower SES, lower income. And this is from American Forests. And here's another set of images that just hit my inbox, June 2021, published in National Geographic, showing 2 different neighborhoods from Los Angeles, one with more sprawling yardscapes and one with more compacted infrastructure. And what these authors found was that along a 6-mile stretch of a single avenue and the neighborhoods along that avenue, you can have differences in temperature on the order of 12 degrees Fahrenheit. And then one more example that hits a little closer to home. This is an article that ran in the New York Times in 2019, and it shows a heat map of Richmond, Virginia. These kind of intensely red areas are where afternoon temperatures are much higher than the cooler outlying areas. And the red areas also overlap with Richmond's communities of color and low income. So one of the next frontiers in urban forestry, so to speak, will involve finding ways to address some of these disparities. Assessing existing canopy is going to be a first big step if a location or a locality hasn't yet done that. And then developing strategies that will prioritize tree planting in certain neighborhoods. But it isn't just a simple, we haven't planted here. And this is something we're studying in and around the Washington, DC metro area. I have some colleagues at Virginia Tech. We're looking at neighborhoods where trees are being offered to neighborhoods to be planted on the boulevards, in the streets, and entire neighborhoods are saying, no, we do not want those trees. Why is a source of study, right? We're trying to understand why certain neighborhoods and certain communities are rejecting street trees. One hypothesis is that municipalities plant the trees, but then the homeowner needs to maintain it, right? And so there is some investment that's needed there. That's just one hypothesis though. Okay, so number 4, I mentioned previously the importance of city parks and other public spaces. But it's worth mentioning and cannot be ignored that private tree planting efforts are absolutely critical. In many urban landscapes, the majority of existing trees and potential planting sites for the future are located on residential property. By some estimates, you see down here, 40% of city land is residential. That occupies a large potential space for planting trees. These 2 images right here are from that report out of the canopy coverage in Harrisonburg, and it's showing the potential planting locations in orange, and then potential literal spots to put a tree in the ground in this black dot here, taking into consideration distance from roads and infrastructure, utility lines, underground infrastructure. So that can be useful if you are mulling over the idea of planting on your property to pull up Google Earth or just walk your landscape and look at potential conflict areas before planting a tree. Because if you make the investment and the time to plant a tree, you want it to be, you want that tree to last, right? Okay, gosh, I'm running out of time. I have so many things to say about this subject. So number 5, urban forest diversity is the first line of defense. Plant more trees, but which trees to plant? Diversity is key. And one thing, I'll say very little about this, but one thing I'll say is a common weakness in street tree populations is that trees are not diverse enough. You can see neighborhoods and streets in that neighborhood lined with red maple, or London plane tree, or one particular, in the city of Harrisonburg, Callery pear, Bradford pear. It's very common, right? One of my earliest projects was looking at street tree populations in a city in Indiana and comparing it to private residential back in yard lots. And I don't want to go too deep into this, but you can see in this table, 3 sample neighborhoods. We found 30 different species in the yards that we sampled and only 2 different species on the streets, the entire neighborhood. This is homeowners, neighborhood associations and homeowner associations. In the second neighborhood, 30 different species in yards, 5 along the streets. 16 and 10. a very big difference, right? So we're not just talking about diversity being key on streets, but private residential properties can buoy urban forest diversity by leaps and bounds. So one last thing I'll say about diversity, one potential rule, and this is more at a municipal level, but one potential rule that's been a source of discussion and sometimes debate is called the 10-20-30 rule. This rule suggests that an urban tree population should include no more than 10% of any one species, 20% of any one genus, and 30% of any family. And an initial street tree assessment was done in Harrisonburg. This is pretty old now. I think it was in 2010. And the authors from Virginia Tech found that 9% of streets are calorie pear, which is an invasive. 5% flowering dogwood. There's diversity there, but that calorie pear is reaching that 10%, 10-20-30 rule. Plus it's invasive, right? So just something to keep in mind, not necessarily for planting in your backyard, but at a municipal level. Okay, number 6, I promise I'm going to go a little bit faster here. Number 6 is native trees are good. If we're talking about which trees to plant, native trees are always good. And I'm guessing this group is big proponents of native trees, right? But well-adapted trees can be even better in if selected well, right? Native trees can't always hack it in narrow spaces with inadequate soil, in between sidewalks and streets with high pollutant levels. So while native tree species are desirable, a cautious selection of non-native species may be needed to create a more resilient urban forest. So you see frequently ginkgo trees planted in tight urban spots. London plane tree, this is again streets, it's just one species, but London plane tree is a very common urban tree because it's well adapted to poor soil and to high pollutant levels. Now, this doesn't mean they're perfect. Some research shows that, for example, ginkgo can only host 1 or 2 caterpillars as opposed to oak that can host 500 caterpillars. Right? So it may not be a great habitat for local native birds and insects, but it can still provide benefits. And if you're interested, at the very end of this talk, I have a link to a document that's published by the Virginia Cooperative Extension called Problem-Free Trees for Virginia Landscapes. And I just highlighted a few here, but note that the cooperative extension is saying you don't have to just plant native trees. Only those that are starred here are native. Fringe tree, American beech, sweet gum, tulip poplar. But all these others, in fact, the state tree of Virginia is not native. But star magnolia, London plane tree, dogwood. So there's other options if you don't want to limit to just native trees. All right, number 7 is, this is a big mantra in the urban forestry community and in the arboriculture community. Make sure you plant the right tree in the right place. Make sure you know your site and the limitations of that site and that your tree is compatible for that site. And I won't go too much into it besides that, but making sure that you know where the utility lines are and not getting too close to your house if you're going to plant in your yard, because roots extend very far out and you want to give them space to grow. But we want to avoid things like this, where we have to top the tree or splice it because a utility line, because it's a danger hazard, right, to the utilities. So that's all I'll say there. There's a resource at the end as well, addressing the right tree, right place. Number 8 and 9 are kind of linked. So we're kind of wrapping up here, but this is a really big one. This simple act of planting a tree isn't so simple. And there's a lot of common planting mistakes that limit the success or the ability of that tree to be successful at that particular site. We were just driving on 33, and in front of, in the boulevard area in front of Martin's, we saw lots of volcano mulching. Even on the campus of JMU, we have volcano mulching, a very big problem. So this is bad, and this is good. You want to see the root flare of a tree. This volcano mulching keeps the bark moist where fungi can grow, and it also means the tree roots are going to love it so much in that tiny little space, it might start circling the tree, getting things like this, circling roots, which can girdle the tree. Now, this can also be because of container issues. Sometimes if you purchase a tree from a nursery, you pull it out and right away you can see some of the roots are starting to circle because they didn't have enough room to grow. So you want to try and pull those out before you plant. Another big thing is planting too deep. You want to make sure that you can, like I said, see the root flare. This one is planted too deep. It's also overwatered. It's going to suffocate the tree. You definitely want to water the tree, but you don't want to overwater it. This is something that is experienced very frequently, in fact. So a couple of recommendations are here. Dig wide, not deep. In fact, if you get a container tree, dig twice the diameter of the container when you're planting. Water frequently, but not excessively. There's recommendations online about how much water to water, but usually you want to water for about 3 years, waning in frequency and amount as time goes on. Mulch out, not up, right? You want to mulch it out this way instead of up. You don't want the mulch to sit on the trunk. And then loosen or prune the circling roots, the roots that might girdle the tree. All that leads to this, which is very similar to number 8. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure because we have limited ability to cure. In fact, you can't cure, right? Trees will seal a wound or seal damage. They won't basically cure it. So you want to try and do the best you can while you're planting the tree to prevent any of these problems. Again, if you invest in the tree, you want it to last. So there's just another kind of stepwise how to plant a tree. And this is my number 10. It takes a village to raise an urban forest. Lots of motivated people, young, old, everyone, to plant and care for trees. It can be a single tree in your own yard, or it could be a tree planting campaign or event in the community. So please, if you feel motivated from this or just feel a deep kinship towards trees, make sure to invest in them. So my calls to action: never stop learning about urban forests and trees. Get involved if you can in community efforts to plant trees and talk about the value of trees to your friends and neighbors. Plant trees, more trees. Plant smartly though. Like I said, if you're going to invest in it, do it well and right. We're talking about, starting the next generation of trees, but old trees give a lot of services. So they need our attention as well. And then last, a plug, the city of Harrisonburg has an urban wood recycling program. So if you must remove a tree, consider trying to recycle it, reutilize it, upcycle it. There's more and more landscaping and contractors that are trying to connect into networks that upcycle wood. Okay, so that's it. That was a mouthful. I apologize that I was kind of rapid fire at the end. There's a lot of great books that have come out in the last 5 years, if you're interested. So here's 4 that are listed here. And then I'm happy to share any resources that may be of interest to you. Some of these resources in this presentation focus on tree planting methods and things to avoid. And then another slide, and the last slide I promise, is focused on some key organizations that are working to kind of advance either the field of urban forestry or are doing really important work in urban forestry. Okay, Jonathan, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was delightful. A lot of really great information there. We have a couple of questions in the chat right now. One of them from Josephina. What are the basic cares to be given to old trees?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at what are the basic cares to be given to old trees? Well, that's a big question. It depends on the species of trees, if there's any threat to them. But honestly, trees are, if they're not up against a sidewalk or abutting a house, let them be. If there's no structural damage to them, we have some trees in our backyard that have probably surpassed what their typical lifespan would be in an urban environment. And we simply prune the dead branches or the branches that we think are hazardous. And even though I'm an arborist, I don't have the equipment to do that. So we hire someone out to do that. And that's it, right? We want to try and preserve the tree or set of trees, really. And sometimes that just involves simply pruning. We mulch as well, but we don't water old trees, partly because we're trying to conserve water, but also partly because their roots have had time to become extensive enough to be able to likely reach layers below ground that is sufficient for them.
We have a request to see if we can get that slide in the books again for some folks that are taking notes. And I will note that we are recording this session, and we will be sure to get this posted on our Facebook page in the next couple of days here if folks wanted to share this out to others that weren't able to attend, or if you just wanted to watch it again, of course.
One thing, this is not specific to urban trees, but the hidden life of trees, something that I find really fascinating, and this is a growing area of research, is investigating how trees communicate with one another through this growing network of fungi, mycorrhizal fungi, below ground that is essentially helping to send signals from one tree to another. And that may be signals about nutrient deficits or about pest damage, or you name it. It's fascinating work, and there's a couple videos online that are short and really interesting.
Any other questions? And I'll note that we did allow folks to be able to go ahead and unmute themselves if you would like to ask a question. Or again, the chat is open if you have a question that way.
Someone said the overstory is powerful. And I think someone said the hidden life of trees. Yeah. And I interrupted someone. Go ahead.
Yeah, excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just giving us the 10 commandments, so to speak. That's great. A question that I have relates a lot about the natives versus non-natives. There is this big effort to bring people to focus on the native side of plants and trees, all because of the damage that is being done to the open areas, yes, parks and preservations and whatnot. and you sort of are indicating that non-natives are also acceptable. So I just want to explore a little bit more on that. The Bradford tree, it is something that, you know, all the organizations that deal with master naturalists, master gardeners, and different organizations talk about focusing on natives. So I was kind of taken by your suggestion as well. So can you explore, I'd say, a little bit more of that?
Yeah.
The balance of trees and, you know, all the ecological ecosystem services that provide, but also that, you know, profound need or having the caterpillars and the bees and the mammals and the birds that we are losing, you know, rapidly, and sort of the basics of the trees and the source is fundamental for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. And I thought if anything might trigger a conversation point, it would be that. Because the discussion of native and non-native is has been ongoing for years, not just specifically to urban forestry, but in general. And what I would say is natives are great. I don't want to discourage natives, but careful selection of non-natives that are proven performers in an area, but also proven to not be invasive. And that's key. I don't want folks to think that I'm encouraging invasives. We don't need any more calorie pear. We don't need honeysuckle in the front yard, right? We have plenty of that already, and we don't want more. But there are lots of non-native trees. And in fact, the definition of non-native, when are we looking at the time period of what constitutes native and not? There's lots of trees and lots of plants that are not native here, but almost have been encompassed into the community, the plant community, and performs well with those. Doesn't take away resources from others, more likely to share and add to the community. Now, invasives, that's one of the qualities of invasives. They, cause damage to the ecosystem and to one finer scale from that, to communities. So we want to avoid invasives, but not discourage non-natives, because we don't want to simplify our palette so much, the tree population so much, that it is vulnerable to a pest or a pathogen or some other risk factor. So I think, if you can increase the palette, diversify in a smart way and in a careful way, that's the way that the urban forestry movement is moving. Does that answer your question, Josefina?
Yes, it does. It is, like my brain is then divided into two. Yes, you are bringing me to the possibility of non-natives, and the effort it is. What are the natives that I can look for any given condition? It is that we don't have enough natives to be able to cover all the needs and whatnot, but I see your point as well. Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm happy to stick around if anyone else has questions, but I appreciate your time, and I'm glad that I could share one of my passions with you all.
Could I address the last question?
Yeah.
So after reading Douglas Tallamy, and listening to foresters, it's my understanding that there is a significant difference in the benefits of a native tree, and I don't care how you want to define it. If it hasn't been in this country, you can say, okay, if it hasn't been in this country for the last 200 years, if it has, then it can be called native. But my point is that studies have been done and shown that plants that are not native to this continent do not support the wildlife because they have not evolved together. The European plants are sugar-based, and the North American plants are protein-based or fat-based. So even though you'll see a bird eating a berry from a plant and it doesn't die from it, it is also the same as feeding your children, raising them on candy and popcorn instead of on protein, which is what baby birds need. So that's why it's important for it to be native as opposed to non-native. I totally agree with the no invasives plan. The other thing is, and this somewhat supports more what you were saying, is if you have the option of not planting a tree because it can't be native, then please do plant a non-native tree or a cultivar, because aside from what the tree provides for habitat for wildlife, the tree also provides stormwater protection, clean air, shade, heat island protection, etc. All those things that were the top three that we all agreed were so important about trees. Thank you.
Ginny, I would agree, yes. And to be fair, I mean, I hope I conveyed that if you're going to plant, yes, if you can plant native, that's great, and you should do that. But there are certain spaces in especially really compacted urban cities, in metro areas, in parking lots where native species are just not going to perform well.
I agree, and I understand your point about that, but we're talking, at least I thought we were sort of talking more about people in their yards.
Yes.
As the urban aspect, where we have more options than the hell strip along a street.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. You're right. Yep.
So some people, and even so, some people would rather have a London plane than a sycamore, because a London plane won't be so tall, it won't be so hard to manage, blah, 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 blah. Then plant a London plane. Sycamores are great trees. London planes have some of those same qualities. Mm-hmm. That's better than saying, well, then I won't plant anything. Or I'll plant a calorie pear.
Yes, please don't do that.
Please don't.
All right, any other questions from folks?
I can stop my screen share there. Sorry about that.
All right, well, thank you all so much for joining this evening. This was, a good no pairs takeaway there. Thank you all so much for joining. Dr. Schmitt-Harsh, again, thank you so much for taking the time out to provide us this really wonderful presentation. It was some great information, some great resources, I think, on how to get connected and looking at some of the work that's already been done in our local area, and some resources on some books to follow up with as well. So thanks again. We hope to see folks for our next session on October 20th.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.